welcome to Freedom Watch, your daily dose of raw liberty, streaming online at foxnews.com. I'm your host, Judge Andrew Napolitano, here defending freedom, defending your natural rights, and defending your right to have a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution. The recently released New York Fed AIG emails reveal a conspiracy among the lawyers for AIG and the New York Federal Reserve to conceal from the Securities and Exchange Commission the true nature and extent of AIG's indebtedness and its intention to pay certain vendors, among them Goldman Sachs, 100 cents on the dollar. It is a federal crime to leave out material information involved in a loan from a federally insured bank. And this wasn't your ordinary loan. This was a case involving the movement of nearly $185 billion among the Treasury, the New York Fed, JP Morgan Chase, and AIG, leaving out the name, the amount, and the intended payment to a creditor of $13 billion would surely satisfy the material misrepresentation requirement of the statute that criminalizes such omissions. The fact that, quote, the government told me to do it is not only not a defense at law, but may and should implicate whoever in the government counseled in favor of such omissions. Though we do not know, and I have not seen any evidence of, any personal knowledge of any of this by the then senior official at the New York Fed, current Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, it is difficult to believe that he would not have known of any of this. The following is clear. It's clear that senior personnel in the legal department of the New York Fed did know of it. Now, the lawyers would no doubt say, in their own defense, they were the bank's lawyers. They and the bank knew of AIG's intentions with respect to Goldman Sachs, and thus that fact did not have to be reduced to writing. Since the Fed knew well where its money was going, there was no harm and thus no foul. Unfortunately for the Fed's lawyers and AIG's lawyers and executives, the sneaky revelation through word of mouth of that which the law requires be stated in writing does not fulfill the requirements of the law. Could it be that the single largest federal bailout in history was procured by fraud? Fraud in which the feds themselves participated and the government actually counseled in favor of criminal behavior. Only in America. It is now my pleasure to introduce one of America's great defenders of freedom today. Congressman Ron Paul joins us from our nation's capital. Congressman, a belated Happy New Year and welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you.
Should Tim Geithner be fired, whether he knew or even if he didn't know what lawyers in his name were telling lawyers at AIG to do in a $185 billion deal?
Yeah, I think he's earned that. I think anybody who's trying to act responsibly and have a clean slate, he would have to go. You implied that probably fraud was involved in this operation, but I think that's a narrow definition of fraud, and the broad definition of fraud, the whole process, the way the whole system of money is fraud. You know, it's a cartel with fiat money, and they're always taking care of their friends. But, you know, I put out a little release after this happened. I didn't concentrate on Geithner, and I think he is important. And even if he didn't know anything about it, to me it seems like he's irresponsible. He should have known something about it. But my point that I made was this makes the issue of transparency of the Fed very, very important. And then they yell and scream that we're not supposed to know. So as bad as the Fed is and what they've done, you know, I blame the Congress still the most because it's we here in the Congress that have the responsibility. The Congress in the past have created this system, and now even this generalized concept of fraud turns into a narrow system of fraud. And the Congress, you know, they're going to tinker and yell and scream and all, but Congress has a lot of responsibility for the mess that we're in today.
You know, I thought of you yesterday, Congressman Paul, when we first learned of this story, and I thought to myself, my goodness, here's another argument in favor of auditing the Fed. Think of the attitude on the part of these Fed lawyers. Let's see. The President's, we're talking about September 08, the President's Secretary of the Treasury is the former chair of Goldman Sachs. You guys are going to take the money we're giving to you and you're going to pay Goldman Sachs 100 cents on the dollar, and you're not going to pay anybody else 100 cents on the dollar. Maybe we shouldn't put that in writing. Think of the problems that come about when the government breaks its own laws?
Judge, do you think this could qualify as the big lie? It's so preposterous, nobody would believe this is conceivable, that they would allow this to happen. But this is a big lie. You know, when you think of what we do and reward Goldman Sachs and all the banks, and they're still back in business. They're making a lot of money, and we're still guaranteeing this money to them, you know, through FDIC and other assurance programs, and that's available. So we haven't really done anything yet. And this commission that's in operation down here right now to investigate. That is another commission that won't accomplish anything. They do not have one free market economist that is on the commission. They probably won't have anybody testify from an Austrian free market viewpoint, and they're going to find the answer to this. The very economists who predicted this mess and know what was going on, and you know, they understand it, but they're not going to touch this. They're going to talk about tinkering around with regulations. If we have a few more regulations that'll, you know, like Sarbanes-Oxley, and chase good companies overseas, that's the only thing that's likely to happen, because they're not even talking about the real problem, the fraud in the monetary system.
Congressman Paul, just think of what we've learned since TARP. Remember when Henry Paulson and Ben Bernanke went rushing into President Bush with some notes written on, almost literally, on the back of a napkin, saying, you got to get us this $800 billion or the sky is going to fall. We now know that there was likely fraud in the AIG deal. We know they didn't even spend the TARP money on what they were going to spend it on. We know that the banks that they bailed out have all paid it back. We know that those banks have become wealthier with federal dollars. We know that some of the banks didn't want, didn't need, couldn't use, and tried to resist the federal money. And there are people in the Congress who are still saying that the Fed has the right to keep its behavior secret from the rest of us. Can they even, with a straight face, make that argument anymore?
Well, they'll try to, and, you know, people seem to gobble it up. But when you think about the leadership of both parties endorsed this, remember when the vote came up on that, our two candidates, Republicans and Democrats, they rushed back and they both voted for this. So, you know, the whole system, whether it's the Federal Reserve System and the excessive spending, there's a little bit of talk, but no real action. So it's a shame. This is why I'm pessimistic on the short run, believing that nothing is going to be changed out here. The deficits and the spending will not come under control, but hopefully our message of freedom and liberty and sound money will get out, because it's growing by leaps and bounds, that we can at least offer the answer when we have a currency crisis. And that's going to be the most important thing, that when we have to rebuild this system, we rebuild it with some common sense, rather than this fraudulent system that just encourages the benefits to all these special interests.
Well, one of the most important pieces of legislation to Freedom Watch viewers is yours to audit the Fed. What is your feeling, optimistic or pessimistic, that at some time in 2010, in some form, it will reach the president's desk? What do you think?
Well, if it reaches his desk in some form, it'll probably be watered down a good bit. To have it reach his desk the way it is now, I believe it's such an important issue to the leaders of the country, the president, and you know, Wall Street and others. I think it would be stopped, because they're not going to allow this to happen. There's too many things. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, this Goldman Sachs deal. I imagine there are hundreds of deals like this, and they've been going on for 30 years or more. So there's so much buried in there, and they're not likely to let this happen. That's like finding out every single thing the CIA has ever done over the last 30 years.
Earlier this week, there was an argument in federal court here in New York City in which Fox Business Network sued the Federal Reserve under the Freedom of Information Act to get a copy of all the documents in TARP. And I went to the oral argument. There were a number of people involved that were friends and colleagues of mine. And the government actually argued that if we reveal today in 2010 the nature of the TARP documents that we saw and dealt with in 2008, it would harm the banks. Harm the banks. The money's already been paid back. The banks have made a fortune. The banks are paying themselves billions in profits and in bonuses. What kind of an argument is that? Bottom line, Congressman Paul, I think Fox is going to win. I think the Second Circuit Court of Appeals is going to grant that Freedom of Information Act request. It'll go all the way to the Supreme Court, but I think we win this round, and that will help your Audit the Fed bill to pass.
But this is a good example of the citizens acting any way they can. because they can't wait on Congress. I've been working at this for a long time, and we are making inroads. But because of these suits and what Fox has done, this has been very beneficial. So everybody has to get together. But because of the attention that Fox got from this lawsuit, I think has helped us a whole lot. It's a lot more difficult for anybody in the Congress to vote against it. I think if there's an up and down vote in the Senate, they'll do what they did in the House. They're going to vote for this. And I hope that happens. I hope I'm not too pessimistic. There is a chance that would happen. I think what might happen is if they allow it to go through, they'll depend on the courts to protect them.
Right.
You know, the courts, and you know this history rather well, the courts have not been good at protecting, sound money, and they've always protected the monopoly of the Federal Reserve and central banking.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right, but I'm glad to hear your optimism in this brand new year that we're in right now. Before I let you go, the president announced this morning, not directly but through somebody else, he's going to ask for another $40 billion to pay for the troops in Afghanistan. Where is the outrage on the left of his own party to A, the concept of an unlawful war, and B, funding the war like George W. Bush did on a credit card?
And then they wonder why there might be some pressure coming on our dollar. We're already under pressure, but it's going to get a lot worse. You just can't imagine where their thinking is. I mean, I'm always baffled by that. But they do it with a straight face, as you say. They just come back and say, well, this is $40 billion. What's the difference? We're already $1 trillion in deficit this year, so a little bit more won't hurt. But they always will qualify and say, we'll worry about the deficit later on, or we'll worry about inflation later on. But right now, there's a crisis, and we have to act, or the world will come to an end. Of course, we're in a financial crisis because we've been acting this way all along.
It's National End the Fed Day, and these people say that they are sick and tired of being robbed.
It's a criminal enterprise. Anybody who charges usury and money laundering and counterfeiting of money, I mean, that's what the mafia does.
What makes me mad about the Fed is the fact that they're so secretive about how monetary policy is. They just keep on printing more and more money, and everyone knows you can't run a printing press and create wealth.
Some Americans are calling for a sound monetary policy and an end to bailouts.
Though not many people showed up here in Washington, D.C., a growing movement of citizens concerned with this country's fiscal policy will gather in 39 cities nationwide at each Federal Reserve building.
Some claim that the Federal Reserve System is at the very heart of the current economic crisis, which these days might be beating out of control. Debbie Kruger is a former Marine and mother of 5. She helped organize this protest.
The Federal Reserve is monopolizing our money system, and I know people that are working 3 jobs and still can't make ends meet. It's just sad and disgusting that we don't have the same quality of life that we used to have. The way they're using the money is a disgrace. You know, all the foreign wars that they're fighting for no reason and based on lies, and the Federal Reserve itself is based on lies.
Another Marine, young Adam Kokesh, served in Iraq and has been a vocal critic of the war since leaving the U.S. Marines.
I think that the Federal Reserve is the driving force behind corporatism in America and the military-industrial complex, which of course is driving our imperialist foreign policy. And often they have no regard for human life or morality or decency.
Dina Gosofsky, RT, Washington, D.C.
It's not about justice, it's not about agenda, it's not about mobilizing people, it's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.